It's the Saturday Show, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Christian Esparza, Alex Napoles, ready for week 2 of college football. We got a full day today, as always. But before we get into college football talk, let's start the show off how we always do. Alex, highlight of your week, man.
Highlight of my week, probably last night. Going out, calling some high school football, always the highlight of my week. So happy football season's back, and we get to be out there covering these amazing local athletes.
I'm right with you. I mean, nothing like Friday Night Lights. Right?
Absolutely. Nothing compares to it.
For my highlight, I'd say I'm going to go back to Thursday night, NFL kickoff. Always great. Great time of the year. Parker's Chiefs. That's right. They got the win over the Ravens on Thursday night. We'll talk more NFL coming up later on in the show, but I mean, it was just so much fun to watch, and it was really, honestly, a good game. And Lamar Jackson put the Ravens on his back. Tremendous effort there. Ultimately, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs got the win, but it's just so nice to have the NFL back, and I'm super excited for tomorrow. We're going to have some great games, and then Monday night as well. So, again, we'll talk more NFL later, but that was my highlight.
Great highlight, and like you said, it was a great game. And yeah, we'll dive into it a little bit later during our fourth segment. We'll kind of deep dive into what we saw from both games, right? Because the Packers and the Eagles also played last night. Yeah,
and that was another good game. Interesting because it was played in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Yeah.
So I definitely have some thoughts on that one. But first, Alex, I want to start off BYU getting the win last night over SMU, 18-15 in Dallas. Second win of the season for BYU. And I guess we'll start with the positives. The biggest positive by far is that the defense looked insane. They came out of the gates firing. And from the first snap, BYU's defense was just swarming. I mean, they started off and Jack Kelly had a huge hit in the backfield, and I mean, everywhere you look, like SMU could not move the ball in the first, probably, I'd say 2 or 3 drives. They did not move the ball. And BYU's defense was just hitting them at or behind the line of scrimmage. A ton of Cougars all over the field. And they did not allow a touchdown. Those 15 points were off of 5 field goals.
Yep.
So BYU did not allow a touchdown all night. And the defense just looked tremendous.
You hit the nail right on the head, Christian. I'd mentioned it earlier. I believe it was the show that we did when Jake was out a couple of weeks ago, but I thought that this BYU defense was a little bit underestimated, right? People weren't giving it the credit that I thought that it deserved, and it kind of showed it last night that they have taken a big step of improvement from where they were last year. I know obviously it's still early in the season. We'll see how that translates into Big 12, into Big 12 play, but I do think that the BYU Cougars defense showed up last night, and they played extremely, extremely well. It's hard to hold an offense, I think, to no touchdowns, but the ability to go out to SMU on the road and hold them to no touchdowns, I think, is a massive, massive win for BYU and that defense.
Yeah, and that's something you and I were kind of on the same page on. I mean, I had been saying, like, I really did expect BYU's defense to take a step forward in year 2 in Jay Hill's system. And, you know, some people were like, why? Like, why do you expect that? And it's like, well, there's a couple things. I mean, just first off, having more comfortability, being more comfortable in this system.
Right.
Because you're learning new things. You're learning a new scheme, essentially, and just having that extra off season to get used to things. I think there's a lot that can be said about just having that much more time to prepare. And then the other thing is they're fairly healthy all around. I mean, they lost Ben Bywater in the off season, but again, Jack Kelly looked really great last night. And so there's just a few things that are going BYU's way so far on the defensive side, and all of it together, again, they look hugely improved over last season, and they've only had 2 games so far over SIU and SMU.
Yeah.
2 teams that aren't quite on the level of Big 12 teams that BYU will be facing later on in the season, but so far I'm very comfortable saying that BYU's defense is vastly improved.
Vastly improved. I think Jay Hill has done a tremendous job. I think under year 2, this defense looks a lot better. I think a lot of the players stepping up are those Weber State transfers, and I think it helps out a lot when you have a guy like Jay Hill, who was the former head coach, knew these guys, knew these players, brought them into the BYU system, and has really, and it seems like that's kind of helped them transition to this new team because they have stepped up. You look at guys like Jack Kelly, you look at guys like Collins, Heckard, and Garrett last year. This defense under Jay Hill, I think, will just continue to get better and better. And like I said, we'll see how that translates into Big 12 play. SMU, an ACC opponent, just a new ACC team right this season. But regardless, I think they stepped up really well. Like I said, holding them to no touchdowns.
Yeah, and, I don't want to make it sound like SMU's not a good team because they are. They're one of the favorites to win the ACC conference this year. And obviously the ACC conference is probably the weakest of the P4 conferences as far as football goes. But, again, it's a great opponent. And to not allow a single touchdown, again, like I can't overstate how huge that is on the road. That's awesome. And SMU played great. I mean, they kind of had their own quarterback battle going on. Preston Stone started the game, and apparently the plan the whole time was for him to play 2 series, and then the next guy, Kevin Jennings, would come in and then play a couple series and then go from there. Kevin Jennings stayed in once he went in, and he clearly did provide a spark for SMU's offense, but, I mean, again, they did not score a touchdown, so really, really good job by BYU. And, Alex, I just realized this. BYU's played 2 games since the last Saturday show, right? They played last Saturday night and then last night. So
that's right.
There's a few things we haven't even been able to touch about. The biggest thing, obviously, Jay Hill, defensive coordinator for BYU, he suffered a heart attack Thursday before their first game. So not 2 days ago, but the week before that. He was miraculously able to attend that first game against SIU. He was up in the box helping call plays. And then he traveled to Dallas with the team. He was there helping last night again. So obviously he's doing well, but we just want to send our best wishes to Coach Jay Hill, and hopefully he doesn't take it too hard, because that's my biggest worry. I mean, a heart attack is a very serious thing, especially at his age.
Yeah.
He's relatively young, right?
49, I believe it was.
Yeah, so to suffer a heart attack right now is very scary. And then I just hope that he doesn't overwork himself too hard.
Right. Absolute definition of a warrior. Like you said, we send our best wishes to the defensive coordinator of the BYU Cougars, Jay Hill. Amazing to see him up in the booth, calling plays, and being involved after having a very scary medical episode. So true definition of a warrior. We send him nothing but our best wishes here from the Saturday show.
Definitely. We talked about BYU's defense improving in year 2 of Jay Hill's system. I want to hear what Kalani Sitake had to say about that post-game. So here's Kalani Sitake talking about this improvement.
Key is the defense is now really familiar with the system, and so there's not like in the past there was a lot of thinking, and now the guys, you can tell that they're comfortable with what we have, our scheme, a lot smoother defensively, and we're not making as many mistakes. Jack is a special player. We've been saying about that from the beginning. Mark gave us a lot, and those guys that came, they played in the system before, so it makes sense for them to not really bat an eye or have any hiccups along the way. It was a smooth transition, and I'm glad those guys are here.
Look at that, Alex. Sounds like we hit it right on the head, huh?
Absolutely. And you know what, Christian? Anytime I hear positive comments or praise about Jack Kelly, it just puts a smile on my face. Because, weirdly enough, I remember him being on my kickoff team his freshman year of high school.
You played with Jack Kelly.
I played with Jack Kelly.
Remind me, is that Kearns?
At Kearns, yeah. Yeah, so it's
that's awesome.
To see a Kearns kid step up into the limelight and succeed, a guy that, was on the football team with me, and now seeing him kind of have the success at Weber State, then at BYU, anytime I hear anything positive about Jack Kelly, just puts a smile on my face.
There you go. Jack Kelly, 5 total tackles, 2 solo, 1 sack, the big sack, like I mentioned to start the game, and then 1.5 tackles, 4 loss. So really big game. But again, number one, like Coach Sitake said, this defense is more comfortable because in the first year, you're doing a lot of learning, right? You have to do a lot of thinking because everything is new. In the second year, you kind of know a lot more, right? So you do less thinking and more doing. It's all just kind of second nature at this point. And then point number 2, like you said, Jack Kelly played with Coach Hill at Weber State, and then he's able to come into this BYU program and help lead the way because, again, he knows the system already. So that's really good. I don't know if you saw on social media, but to end the game, basically BYU had a big stop on a fourth down. SMU was trying to get the ball downfield, and BYU's defense forced an incompletion, and then it cut to Kalani Sitake on the sideline, and he was just losing his mind in a good way. Like, he was cheering, celebrating. He was so fired up because his defense played their butts off all night.
They did. They really did.
So that was just really, really exciting for me to see Coach Sitake be that happy in his defense's performance. And that's why I wanted to start off so strongly talking about BYU's defense this morning, because I really cannot say enough just how impressive they were last night.
They were. They absolutely stepped up to the plate and kind of carried this BYU team to victory. Defensively, BYU was huge last night. And I want to go back a little bit to last season under, first year under Jay Hill. There was a couple of media availabilities after practices where Jay Hill said that this is a very complicated system to learn. This is a complicated system to run defensively. And so it was going to take time to build it up. It was going to take time for those players to get comfortable in the system. I remember cutting those up last year and hearing Jay Hill talk about how difficult this system was to kind of implement and learn. And so he expected it to take time to develop, and I think we're finally seeing that, Christian. I think we're finally seeing those players get comfortable in this system, know this system by heart, and clean up those mistakes that Kalani Sitake was talking about. There wasn't too many defensive miscues, I feel like, last night. I feel like last night this was probably one of the better performances we've seen BYU have defensively since Jay Hill has come into the system.
Oh, I 100% agree. And it's very refreshing to see this BYU defense play like you and I were expecting, because, again, not everybody was expecting that level so far. So that's the positive from last night. But then we got to go to the negative, because this is also a big storyline, Alex. BYU's offense they struggled. I don't know how else to put it. They only put up 18 points. They scored the first touchdown of the game in the first quarter, and that was great to get started off like that. But then it took kind of a miracle on a fourth down play, a really, really gutsy call, and it was a great play, and that set up the go-ahead field goal at the very end of the game to win. But, man, Jake Retzlaff really, really struggled. 5 of 28 last night, 202 yards. He threw a touchdown, and that was a nice throw, but he threw 2 picks, and then he lost a really big fumble. And BYU's offense just really could not move the ball, especially on the ground. I mean, let's look at the rushing stats here. 32 carries, 138 yards, and 1 rushing touchdown. But 37 of those 138 yards came on that fourth down conversion play. So you kind of take that big total number, 138, you take that with a grain of salt. You're basically looking at 31 carries for 100 yards.
Yeah, that's not good.
That's bad.
That's not good. Those aren't good statistics. And then, yes, LJ Martin, who went down early in the game, and I think you can kind of see the difference in the running game once LJ was no longer in the game.
Yeah, 100%. Like, LJ, even when he was in the game, like, he wasn't playing great. Excuse me, I'm trying to find his rushing stats. He wasn't anything phenomenal, right? 5 carries, 20 yards. And then Ropati came in and filled in for LJ Martin. And Ropati didn't look very good either. And they were getting hit at or behind the line of scrimmage. And I don't know if that's because the offensive line was missing blocks. I don't know if it's because the running backs couldn't read the lanes. I don't know what was going on, but they just could not move the ball on the ground. And I will give credit to Retzlaff, because he was able to get some good carries in. He had 10 carries for 35 yards, and he really set up, like, going back to that fourth down conversion. I mean, it was a nice triple option play where the defense kind of collapsed on Retzlaff because he had taken a few carries earlier in the game. So he was able to draw attention, and then that kind of left a lane wide open for Davis to get that long carry to set up the field goal. But outside of a couple big plays, like, again, BYU could not move the ball through the air or on the ground.
Yeah, offensively they struggled. And, I mean, just looking at these numbers, like, there's nothing super eye-popping to me. I think maybe, call me a cynic, but I think maybe the thing that pops out the most to me are the 2 interceptions and the fumble, right? The turnover bug catching BYU here a little bit early through the season. They got to clean that up. You cannot fumble the ball. You can't throw interceptions. You got to keep hold of the ball. And we gave credit to BYU's defense for only holding SMU to those 15 points. Give a little credit too to the SMU's defense for holding BYU to 18 points and forcing those turnovers. I thought those early turnovers, especially the fumble, were huge for SMU. Obviously not good for BYU, but they got to clean up this running game. They got to clean up this passing game. And Jake Retzlaff, I think, needs to step up his game a little. Nothing too, besides maybe that fourth down conversion and a couple of chunk plays. Nothing too eye-popping from Jake Retzlaff either in this one.
Yeah, Darius Lassiter had a nice catch and run, 57 yards, and that was the biggest play of the day for BYU's offense. But I don't think that drive ended in points. That drive might have ended in an interception. So yeah, the turnovers are a huge concern for Retzlaff, especially because you go back to his 4 starts last year. He finished his 4 games with 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and 3 lost fumbles. Then you go back to last night, like you said, 1 lost fumble and 2 picks. And it's hard because the lost fumble came on a really weird play where it looked like there was some miscommunication. Jake Retzlaff thought it was supposed to be an end around where he was going to hand the ball off to a receiver that came in motion. The receiver didn't look like he knew the ball was supposed to go to him. So the Retzlaff was able to hold on to the ball. Like, it's not like he fumbled on the exchange, but then he kind of tucked it and tried to get upfield and run, and the defensive lineman just made a nice play where he stuck his hand out and just hit it out of Retzlaff's hands. And it seemed like that fumble right there really caused Jake Retzlaff to be shaky for the rest of the game. And he looked antsy in the pocket. It looked like he was just really anxious trying to move the ball and missed on a lot of throws. And if you can't move the ball on the ground, you need to be able to get some yards through the air. And BYU was not really able to do that. I know they finished with 202 yards through the air, but it really didn't feel like they had that much. I mean, the interesting thing to me, though, is that at no point did they switch to Bohannon. And they were trailing in this game late in the fourth quarter, right? Or I guess it was tied, 15-15. And at no point did they apparently think about putting Bohannon in. And Coach Satake talked about that last night. I want to hear what Kalani Satake had to say about why he did not even think about putting Gary Bohannon in.
We felt good about our quarterback. You know, we have to be able to find a way to fight through it, and it's hard to play the game when you're just taken out if mistakes happen. I mean, we knew that mistakes happen in football. We got to rally around guys and allow them the chance to redeem themselves.
That's interesting. I get it. I see both sides, I guess, because you know, you don't want to pull a quarterback as soon as he makes mistakes because then he's going to be worried about making mistakes the rest of the year. But at the same time, you don't want to wait too long to the point where the game is out of hand once you decide to make that change.
And I think at the end of the day, that maybe helped BYU's decision to keep Jake Retzlaff in is the fact that this game wasn't getting out of hand, is the fact that their defense did a really great job of keeping them in this one. So as long as you have a chance and as long as you were in this game, you might as well allow Retzlaff to be in those situations to kind of learn from those mistakes and continue to have confidence in him, because the more you continue to have confidence in him, you hope that continues to grow the confidence of Jake Retzlaff.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, one of those interceptions came on a busted screen play, and SMU was able to get the ball deep in their own territory. I mean, I'm talking within like the 10-yard line. And BYU's defense did not allow a touchdown. In fact, I think they forced a fumble later on that drive. So that's kind of what you're talking about. Like, if your defense is playing well enough that you don't have to worry about the game getting out of hand, then maybe that does make you feel a little safer keeping Jake Retzlaff in. But I do think ultimately this is a big concern for BYU going forward. If their offense can't put up numbers, if they can't move the ball against an SMU team that's not really known for their defense, that does concern me going forward.
It is concerning. 202 yards passing and 138 rushing yards. That doesn't move the needle, and I don't think that's gonna really equals success in the Big 12 play.
No. It's even next week against Wyoming. Like I know Wyoming hasn't looked great to start the year, but you can't take them lightly if you're BYU, and you need to get your offense figured out because that's a big game. And if you're 3-0 going into Big 12 play, that's huge.
Best case scenario.
Yeah, that's absolute best case scenario. So you need to get this offense figured out so you can pick up that win against Wyoming, get 3 wins before you start your conference play, and really get on track, especially if your defense is hot. Because if your defense is hot and then you get your offense figured out, then you're rolling.
Absolutely. As soon as they can figure it out, move the ball, and start putting up 300-plus passing yards, put up, hopefully closer to 200 rushing yards for this BYU offense, I think we're having a completely different conversation. As long as the defense continues to play the way that they're playing, I think they will be in games, but they really do need to figure out this offense, right? They need to figure out the run game. They need to figure out and hopefully get Jake Retzlaff a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up. Satake had another interesting quote in his postgame. He talked about in the past we would have lost this type of game. Jake Retzlaff went 0-4 last year, again, as a starter, and he struggled with turnovers. But some of those games they were in, going to the Oklahoma State game, that was a thriller all the way up until the very end. So I want to know what Coach Satake had to say about kind of why they were able to win this game and they would have lost it in the past.
I like the way we found a way to win this game. In the past, we've been down or had turnovers, and guys hung their heads in the past, and now the guys are fighting through and not giving up.
It's easy to keep going, I guess, when your defense is swarming the way they were. He talked about keeping their heads high and not hanging their heads, and obviously, if you're turning the ball over on offense and then you're giving up points on defense, it's really easy to get discouraged. But the defense, again, keeping this team alive last night.
I think that's the biggest thing, right? When you lose a turnover battle, and those lead directly to touchdowns, those lead directly to scores. We're having a different conversation, right? Your offense can't keep the ball, your defense can't stop them. But like I said, it's the fact that the defense was able to hold SMU to no touchdowns. The defense is able to hold SMU after those turnovers. I think that's the biggest thing, and it does breed confidence. And like Kalani Satake mentioned it, you gotta hold your head high. And right now, it sounds like that defense is playing with a little bit of confidence.
BYU getting the win 18-15 over SMU last night. Again, LJ Martin left the game after just 5 carries. I saw him walking out of the tunnel on crutches, so that's huge. If they're losing LJ Martin, I don't know what they're going to do without him because clearly they struggled moving the ball.
It's up to Hinckley Rapati now to step up. There was a lot of conversations about how Rapati needed to step up this year, and Miles Davis too. Miles Davis obviously had that 4th down conversion late in the game that you were talking about, Christian, but still Miles Davis, 3 carries, 37 yards. His longest being that 37 yards, right? So before that, his 2 carries didn't really amount to much. Hinckley Rapati with 8 carries, 32 yards, 13 long. Hinckley and Miles Davis need to step up for this BYU side, especially if LJ Martin can't go. We had conversations at the beginning of the year, right, when there was questions about LJ's health, about how important LJ was to this run game. Now you're going to have to figure it out without him.
Yeah, and that's an important thing to point out too is LJ Martin was struggling with a shoulder injury throughout fall camp, and there were questions about whether he'd be able to play week 1 because of a shoulder injury. Last night seemed to be a lower leg injury somewhere. So this is a completely different injury. Regardless of what the injury is exactly, LJ's banged up, and he's not at 100%, and he likely won't be at 100% this season. So wherever his health is at, you're right, Alex, people are going to need to step up behind him, whoever it is. So we will see. I'm really excited for BYU's next game against Wyoming because, again, Wyoming they didn't look great last week, but you can't take them lightly if you're BYU. And it's a really, really big game for the Cougars, especially to get that 3rd win of the year in 3 weeks. That would be best case scenario, like you mentioned.
And Wyoming's just chomping at the bit to get out and play BYU at home.
Yep, up in Laramie, that's going to be a big game for both teams. Coming up next, though, speaking of big games, we're going to preview Utah State playing at USC. a little bit of late night college football. That's a 9 p.m. kickoff. So we're going to talk about that on the other side of this break. This is the Saturday Show on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Barnes going to throw again on 2nd and 3. He'll keep it himself and get the first down and more. He's off to the races. He's going to score. Oh! The Pig Farmer, 10-5 touchdown, Utah State. Suey! How about that? Bryson Barnes takes it to the house. Touchdown, Utah State.
Suey, baby. That's Bryson Barnes last week getting the 63-yard touchdown run to help the Aggies get the win over Robert Morris in week 1. Utah State won that game 36-14, and it was a really interesting game, Alex, because Utah State was down 14-10 going into halftime, and they lost Spencer Petras to injury, they lost Robert Briggs to injury, but ultimately they were able to come out and get the win again, 36-14. In part due to that 63-yard touchdown run from the Pig Farmer.
Coming out, and having the rough start, but being able to come back and kind of take control of that game, and especially, after losing your starting quarterback, having Bryson Barnes step in and be able to kind of lead that team to a victory against Robert Morris, I think it does a lot for your confidence, not only for that offense, not only for Utah State, but also, of course, for Bryson Barnes, who may or may not have to play at USC tonight.
Yeah, and that's the big thing is, again, Spencer Petras left the game early due to an injury. We don't really know the extent of that injury. We don't know if he's able to play tonight. Nate Dreiling has kind of kept that under wraps. He's playing his cards close to his chest. So we don't know who's going to be at quarterback tonight, but of course the storyline is Bryson Barnes playing with the Utah Utes last year was able to get the win over USC. They won 34-32 in LA. So there's a lot of people that want to see Bryson Barnes tonight to see if he can do it again.
I think a different situation, obviously, but kind of similar at the same time where, Utah wasn't healthy heading into USC, but they were able to walk away with a massive win for Utah's season last year. Now, I'm sure people are looking at Bryson Barnes and hoping that he can head into, Los Angeles, head into Southern California, and come out and kind of replicate that performance where you go in and you beat this team you're probably not supposed to beat.
Yeah. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's on paper, it's going to be a very tough game for the Aggies. Bryson Barnes played pretty well last week. He started off, his stat line, 11 of 22, 198 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. We got to talk about that interception, though, because that was one of the best catches that you'll ever see. If you haven't seen it, you got to go find it on social media. The corner made an incredible circus catch, jumped up to his right, caught it with his left hand, and did like a 360 kind of barrel roll to his left while he was jumping to his right. It was so impressive. And so that's the type, it shows up as an interception on paper and it goes against Bryson Barnes, but really, what can you do?
That's probably one of the most incredible plays of week 1, honestly.
It's one of the most impressive catches I've ever seen. It's right up there with Odell Beckham's catch as one of the best catches, jaw-dropping that you'll ever see. But yeah, Bryson Barnes came in, and the Aggies' offense started slow last week. And with Spencer Petras, they weren't really able to move the ball. He threw 2 interceptions himself. He did throw a touchdown, and then he left the game after 15 pass attempts. And Bryson Barnes came in and kind of sparked the Utah State offense. So that's a big question. Number one, you have the health of Spencer Petras. Number two, you have the fact that they weren't really able to do anything with him at quarterback. It looked like he was kind of struggling there, especially in the late first and early part of the second quarter.
He did have a 57-yard pass in the first quarter, Spencer Petras, so we got to give him a little bit of credit for that. But, you covered this game, Christian. You were here with the Zone, or with the KSL Sports Zone covering this game. Down at the break, 14-10, was there any, concern from you about this USU team in the first half?
It's always kind of shocking trailing at halftime to an FCS opponent, right? But Scotty said during halftime, I mean, he said, I'm not really worried about that. And it was off air. Like, he didn't really say that in his halftime show, but we were just kind of chatting. He was like, yeah, I'm not really worried about this one. He said it doesn't feel like the Weber State game. Utah State lost to Weber State a couple years ago, and that was a huge blow. And everybody, it's still, I mean, like Scotty just said, like everybody talks about it in Logan to this day because that was not supposed to happen. But he said this doesn't feel like that. So Scotty wasn't worried. But you mentioned that 57-yard touchdown pass. That's Kyrese White, slot receiver, big hair coming out the back of his helmet. And I got to tell you, Alex, he popped. His speed was incredible. That was a big, long catch and run. And he's just one of those players where, and he had another big play in the second half as well. He's one of those players that even just watching the TV broadcast, like you can see he's faster than everybody else on the field. Petrus got the ball to him short, and he was able to tuck it and run and outrun the entire defense, and it was so impressive.
Good to see him get 2 touchdowns, like you mentioned. Good to see him get 2 touchdowns in that one. Also, Jalen Royals with a touchdown. I think that's huge, obviously, for the confidence of that offense and for Jalen Royals. Now, I guess, how do you build on that? How do you build on that and go into SC, go into a hostile environment, hostile territory to a top 10 team in the country? USC, I think, surprised me personally against LSU. I thought, when I think of USC and when I think of LSU, I just think of high-powered offenses. I think of offenses who are just going to get the ball over the top, score these long touchdowns, score some chunk plays, and light up the scoreboard. But I was honestly impressed with SC's defense for the first time in a long time.
Did you ever think that you would say that?
No.
While Lincoln Riley was there?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Their defense last week against LSU, I think, shocked a lot of people. Definitely took me a little bit for a shock. So if you're USU, how do you go into that environment and just build off your win and maybe, try to go for this upset?
Yeah, and that's the really hard question, right? Is because you were able to come together in the second half as a team and really get rolling and instill some confidence in your program last week against Robert Morris. But then you have this juggernaut week 2, and then it's not going to get any easier next week when they play Utah. So you've got 2 really tough games on your schedule right now. So it is hard to get the ball rolling and get the confidence, and it's hard to not walk out of these 2 games feeling down on yourself, especially if you kind of get whooped. So I would definitely say I would think Utah State's going to come out and they're really going to try to establish the run. I mean, Robert Briggs is a huge loss. He had kind of a gruesome injury last week. Really unfortunate. He got rolled up on, and he's out for the season. He was playing really well. He was on his way to 100 yards. He had 9 carries for 88 yards. But Rasul Faison, he's a tough son of a gun, dude. Like, he was probably my favorite player outside of White, my favorite player to watch on Utah State's offense last week. He was just, it's kind of like Isaiah Pacheco with the Chiefs, right? Like, his legs do not stop churning. And there were a couple of times where he was getting hit 2 or 3 yards past the line of scrimmage, and he just keeps chugging and turning that 3-yard carry into an 8-yard carry. And it's not impressive on the stat sheet, but that's huge when you have a running back who refuses to go down on first contact, and you need 3 guys at least to take him down. So I do think that Utah State's going to lean on Rasul Faison tonight.
And I think you have to, considering how that defense kind of looked last week for USC. Kind of have to establish the run, keep the ball on the ground, and maybe just take away the clock as much as you can, right? Don't let SC's offense onto the ball. That might be a key for Utah State this weekend against a very high-potent offensive team, right? Trying to keep the ball away from USC as much as possible. And if you can, take away some good yards on the run, keep it on the ground and take away some of that clock, Utah State, that might be the way they want to approach this one.
Yeah, Miller Moss last week really impressed for USC in that 27-20 win over LSU. 378 yards passing for Miller Moss. Only 1 touchdown, but, 378, that's a big number, as you mentioned, again, against a top-tier opponent in LSU. But the rushing, on the other hand, USC had 23 carries for 69 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that's 3 yards per carry on an average. I definitely think Utah State's going to want to turn this into a ground and pound game, because even if, let's see, USC allowed 113 yards on 25 carries, 4.5 yards a carry. That's kind of middle of the road, right? Like, that's not an elite rushing defense for USC, but it's not a bad rushing defense either. So I do think that Utah State is going to turn this into a run the ball and defensive type of game. That's their best shot at winning. They don't want to let USC air it out and put up a bunch of points.
The second Miller Moss begins to air it out, you're in trouble, because he looked amazing last week throwing the ball. Miller Moss, like you said, surprised a lot of people. This whole USC team, I think, surprised a lot of people last week. Took the game against LSU to kind of make a statement. Big win for their first ever game as a Big Ten school. We'll see if they can carry momentum into obviously Big Ten play. But first, Utah State on the docket. We'll see how that one goes tonight.
Yeah, everybody kind of had questions on how USC would look, obviously, after the departure of Caleb Williams, former Heisman winner, drafted number 1 overall in the NFL by the Chicago Bears. And under Caleb Williams, again, like I brought up earlier, their defense was bad. Their defense was horrendous. And you have this great player who leaves. You have questions on the defense, and everybody was wondering how USC would look, and they came out week 1, and they definitely seem to have answered some questions. They started off ranked 23rd in the AP Top 25. After that win over LSU, they're up to 10 now. So clearly they are one of the top teams in the country. Big game for Utah State, but I hope that let's be frank, Alex. 2 tough games coming up the next 2 weeks. Odds are they're going to be 1-2 entering week 4, right? I just hope they don't get down on themselves.
No, and I think the key to all this is to not get down on yourself. And I mean, look, you still have a tough matchup to look ahead to, not only with Utah, but going to Temple and playing in Pennsylvania against the Temple Owls. We're not talking about that game because we have USC and Utah on the docket for USU, but that's also going to be a super tough game. So if Utah State comes out of the gate and heads into Mountain West play at 1-3, they cannot get down on themselves. They have a super, super tough out-of-conference schedule, playing these, 2 of the top teams in the country, and playing a tough opponent like Temple on the road. They can't get down on themselves. They have to continue to keep the confidence, continue to rally around your veterans, rally around your leaders as you head into Mountain West play, because it's a very true possibility that Utah State heads into Mountain West play at 1-3.
Yeah, and what's tough is this is where you need your head coach, right? This is where head coaches come into play as far as keeping the locker room together after some discouraging losses. So after this brutal stretch, we're going to know what we have in Nate Dreiling. We're going to know if he really is head coach material or if he's just the guy filling in. So it's a big challenge. We're going to see if Dreiling can step up and keep this Aggie team together. But going back to the quarterback situation, it's tough because Spencer Petras is the guy you brought into the portal. You named him the starter in spring over McKay Hillstead and Bryson Barnes. That caused McKay Hillstead to transfer. Then Spencer Petras goes down in game 1. We don't know how healthy he is. But if he's healthy, he is going to be the starter tonight. I don't think there's a question about going to Bryson Barnes, even though he got the win against SC last year. He got the win last week against Robert Morris. I think you have to stick with the guy that was named the starter in spring.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about confidence in the quarterback with like Retzlaff in that situation with Gary Bohannon. Now you can kind of attribute the same thing where you got to keep that confidence in your quarterback just to allow him to be in that system, to allow him to get more comfortable and allow him himself to grow the confidence. Because if you do decide to, roll out Bryson Barnes, unless he's healthy, right? Unless he's healthy. If you decide to roll out Bryson Barnes, it could take a knock on that man's confidence.
Yeah, so big game for Utah State tonight. Again, that's a 9 p.m. kickoff. We're going to have pregame here on 1280 The Zone starting at 8. Scotty G, as always, will be on the call. I'll be producing that one. So tune in because it really is going to be an interesting game for the Aggies. I know we're a little pessimistic about it, but at the end of the day, like, it's a top-tier opponent, and it's going to be some fun football to watch. And I just am interested to see how head coach Nate Dreiling and this staff approach this game, if nothing else.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. And, dude, shout out to you, man. You're a warrior. You got to be in here at 10 a.m. to do this show, and then you got to come back later tonight, and you're probably going to be here till 3, 4 a.m. doing Utah State. If anyone's a warrior, it's Christian Esparza.
No, it's Scotty G. Scotty's going to be flying home from the game overnight. Yeah. No, that's part of the grind, right? That's what they all joke about. The grind, working in sports. It's fun, though. We do it because we love it.
Absolutely.
So, again, Utah State taking on USC, 9 p.m. kickoff tonight here on The Zone. Coming up next, we're going to talk about technical fouls. Rudy Gobert catching strays again, Alex. So stay tuned to hear what happened with that. Again, this is the Saturday Show, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
If you're coming from the street with dirty shoes on your feet, that's a technical foul. If you switch the radio to some modern music show, that's a technical foul. If you touch the thermostat,
You'll get hit with a bat.
'cause that's a technical foul.
You will feel my wrath.
That's a technical foul.
Personal foul, 69, offense. He was giving them the business.
A technical foul.
The Saturday Show, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. You just heard the technical fouls intro right there, one of our favorite segments of the show. We take this time to talk about some of the sillier things that happen in sports, some of the dumber, more stupid things that happen. But before we get into that, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, Alex, full slate of college football. You said we are on upset alert. Give us a quick update.
We're on upset alert. Bowling Green has just taken a lead over Penn State, 17-10, with 11:48 left to go in the second quarter. An unranked Bowling Green at Penn State, number 8 in the country, currently trailing.
Wow. Some other scores from across college football. Georgia Tech and Syracuse tied at 7. Michigan and Texas. Texas is up 7-0 at the end of the first quarter there. Arkansas is up 14-0 over Oklahoma State. Kansas State is trailing Tulane 7-3. And then Army and FAU. Army's up 14-0 over Florida Atlantic. We do a funny little segment on Jake and Ben where I pick like the worst, we call it worst game of the weekend. So I pick like the most unwatchable college football game, and I picked Army and Florida Atlantic for this week because Army doesn't throw the ball at all. They had 6 passing attempts in week 1, and then FAU is not that good. So anyways, a packed slate of college football, and I think everybody's going to be watching Texas and Michigan. That's going to be a really fun game. But again, Arkansas and Oklahoma State could get exciting too. So we'll keep you updated on some scores throughout the show. And a quick programming note, Alex and we're going to be on the air until about 12:25 today. Normally we end at 12, but Ute pregame show is starting at 12:30, so we're going to lead right into that. So we get an extra segment to play around with. But now it's time for technical fouls. Alex, start us off with your technical foul for this week.
I'm going to pose this as a question for you.
All right.
My technical foul involves Rudy Gobert. So who hates Rudy Gobert more, Shaquille O'Neal or Draymond Green?
That's a tough question, man. I don't know if there's an answer.
Shaquille O'Neal has decided to throw some strays towards Rudy Gobert.
Again?
Shaquille O'Neal was on a podcast with his son Miles. Miles asked him who was the worst basketball player of all time. Without hesitation, Shaquille O'Neal says Rudy Gobert. Miles, Shaq's son, asked him, well, what about Ben Simmons, who Shaq proceeded to also call a bum. Miles and Shaquille O'Neal got into this conversation about Rudy Gobert, and Shaquille O'Neal said that if you sign a contract for $250 million, show me your $250. There's a reason why I walk funny and why I can't turn my neck and why I can't do it, because I played for my $120 million. So you guys like him that are messing the system up, making all this money, and they can't play. So I don't respect guys like that. To which Rudy Gobert replied, "It is sad to see someone that has accomplished as much as you did, Shaq, both in sport and business, still be triggered by another man's finances and accomplishments. I get the entertainment part, but unlike other folks, you don't need to say stuff to stay relevant.
That's really unfortunate because Shaquille O'Neal is one of the greatest to ever play, right? One of the best to ever do it. Rudy Gobert has his own accolades. I mean, I've lost track of how many Defensive Players of the Year he's won, right? So it's just it's tough to see a legend talk down to somebody who ultimately will be going into the Hall of Fame in Rudy Gobert. And especially here in Salt Lake City, like, he's still loved by everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I still like Rudy Gobert. You know, even though he's playing with Minnesota, I wish him nothing but the best, but I don't know, man. I feel like Rudy Gobert gets a lot of unwarranted hate.
Yeah. Especially
from other players.
Right.
Especially Shaq and
Draymond.
And Draymond Green.
Yeah. And it's hard because I get what Shaq is saying, in the sense that if you're going to be paid one of the highest contracts in the NBA, you need to be more than just a defensive stopper. And I get that. But at the same time, like I was saying earlier, I don't think that legends of the game have the right to talk down on somebody who, yes, he has his flaws, but in reality is one of the best players in the NBA, at least on the defensive side. And he's a Hall of Famer, and there's not really an argument there. And to have Shaquille O'Neal talk down to him like that, I just think it's disrespectful, and it's getting stale at this point, frankly.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. You can't argue with 4-time NBA Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah,
he's won it 4 times. Let's give Rudy his flowers.
Yes.
He's earned it.
100%. Now over the NFL world, my technical foul. I'm going to go with Jamar Chase here. So if you're unaware of the situation, Jamar Chase has been holding out all summer with the Cincinnati Bengals, star wide receiver, one of the best receivers in the NFL. But my issue with this is that he's holding out 2 years before his deal is up. Okay, you've got players like Brandon Ayuk, for example. He held out because he's in the last year of his contract, and he wants to be paid like one of the highest paid. He wants to be one of the highest paid receivers in the NFL, right? And if you're on the last year of your deal, that makes sense. But for Jamar Chase to bring all this drama to Cincinnati right now with 2 years left on his deal, I think is incredibly selfish, and I think it's weird, and I think it's unfortunate because we don't even know if he's going to play tomorrow against New England. He said in some media availability that we can't play because he used some language. But he said it's basically his decision on whether he's going to play tomorrow. And then head coach Zach Taylor said that if Jamar Chase does play, he's going to be limited because he hasn't practiced with the team all summer. And so you look at it from the team perspective, this is a team that really disappointed last year because Joe Burrow was hurt, T. Higgins was hurt, and after making that Super Bowl run a couple years ago, they really fell flat on their face, Alex. And so you'd think that they should be hungry. They should be wanting to go into the season full force, but instead you've got really players like Jamar Chase who are just being selfish at this point because, again, holding out 2 years with 2 years left on your deal is crazy.
And it's interesting to see kind of that this all sparked and this all started because Justin Jefferson got paid.
Yeah.
And I think there's a little bit of jealousy there because he's not getting paid as much as Justin Jefferson.
Well, the thing that's funny about that is, Justin Jefferson came into the league a year before Jamar Chase did. Justin Jefferson got paid this summer.
Yeah.
Why would Jamar Chase expect to get paid this summer? Also, if Jamar Chase waits another year, chances are he's going to get paid more. I think that if he were to get paid right now, he'd probably not make as much per year as if he were to wait a year. I don't get where this is coming from. And that's interesting you bring up Justin Jefferson because they asked him about his contract situation because Justin Jefferson didn't hold out. And it was known, he started his contract talks with 2 years left on his deal. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But he never held out. Even with a year left on his deal, he did not hold out. He made it known that he wanted more money. But at the end of the day, he showed up. And Justin Jefferson, in his media availability, he talked about how he wanted to show to his teammates that he's not all about the money, that he wants to show up and help these guys win, and he doesn't want to come across as selfish. And that's such a stark contrast to his friend and former teammate Jamar Chase, who is doing the exact opposite of that. It's a big year for the Bengals. It's a really big year because they've got a division rival in the Ravens who look really, really good, and they went to the AFC Championship last year, and you would think that they would want to be all hands on deck to be as good as they can this year and make another run at the Super Bowl potentially. But instead, you got guys who are whining because they're not getting paid enough, apparently.
Jamar Chase, technical foul on you for making it about the money.
Yeah.
Make it about the game. Be out there for your team.
I'm all for guys getting paid as much as they can. I want that to be known. I was really happy for Justin Jefferson to get his money. I think it's great for these guys to get this sort of money, and they deserve it because it's a huge product. It's a big deal. But again, with 2 years left on your deal, you got to read the room, man. And at some point, you got to show up. You gotta show up. So, anyways, that's enough on that. Let's talk not Utah. What do we have up next? We're gonna go NFL Week 1. We're gonna stay NFL in our next segment. We'll get to Utah at the 12 o'clock hour because we'll lead right into the Utah pregame show. But coming up next on the other side of this break, Alex and I are going to break down Week 1 of NFL. We've had 2 big games so far this week and then a full slate tomorrow. So can't wait to get into some NFL talk. Here on the other side of this break, this is the Saturday show on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.